Televidentes de Canal Institucional, los saludamos con esta bella imagen de la torre de reloj acá en la ciudad de Cartagena. Esta es la sexta plataforma regional para la prevención de atención del riesgo en las Américas. Nosotros desde el día de ayer hemos estado informando cada uno de los encuentros que se han ido realizando. Ayer contamos con la presencia del presidente Juan Manuel Santos. Hoy, en contados segundos, estará el ministro de Ambiente, Luis Gilberto Murillo. Muy buenos días, Carolina.
Good morning,
¿Qué
Carolina.
nos espera este día acá en la Heroica?
Are we expecting for today
Buenos días
in
a
La
todos
Heroica?
nuestros
Good morning, Juan
televidentes que
Carlos,
nos ven a
and our
través de
viewers
Canal
that see
Institucional
us through
y
Canal
vía
Institucional
streaming. Pues, Juan
and
Carlos,
streaming.
hoy
Juan
continúan
Carlos,
las plenarias
today
de
we
esta
continue
sexta
on the plenary
plataforma
sessions in
regional
the
para la
sixth
reducción del
regional
riesgo de
platform for the
desastres.
reduction of
Iniciaremos en
disaster
pocos
risk.
minutos la
We will
plenaria
begin in a
número
few
2.
minutes with plenary session
Habla
number
sobre
2.
todo el tema
We're going to be
de
talking
los
about
objetivos de
all of
desarrollo
the objectives of
sostenible,
sustainable
tanto
development
en la región
in the
como en la
region and
subregión de
in the
las Américas,
subregion
a
of the
nivel
Americas,
nacional
at
y
the
a nivel
national
local,
level
a nivel
and
de
at the local level,
departamentos
at the
y
department
municipios
level and
de Colombia.
municipality level in Colombia.
Contaremos, como bien lo
We
dijo
will
usted,
have, as you
con
have
la
well mentioned,
presencia del
the
señor
presence
ministro
of
de
the Minister
Ambiente,
of the
doctor
Environment,
Luis
Dr.
Gilberto
Luis
Murillo, pero
Gilberto
también
Murillo,
con la señora
but as
Mami
well
Musutori,
with
la
Mami Musutori.
representante
She's
de
the
del
representative
secretario
of the General Secretariat for the Reduction of Disaster Risk in the United Nations. And we will have a broad panel, the Ambassador of the European Union for Colombia. We will have her in this plenary session as well. This is a matter of evaluation. We have basically been talking about the context of the country, about Hidroituango, and all of these matters. And we will have one of the ministers that have been coordinating with the national system of support for disaster risk. And we'll look into the decision-making process and the sustainable development and the responsibilities of the private community and publicly entities around risk disaster. We will talk about part of the experience and we'll talk about what's happening in the global agenda in terms of these measures that have been taken by several countries around climate change. That will be one of the key points that we will be talking about in the Convention Center of Cartagena de Indias, Julio César Turbay Ayala. So what about going to the auditorium now, and we can start? Yes, we have Ana Maria de Escobar in the auditorium of Getsemaní to begin the second plenary session in the sixth regional platform for the reduction of disaster risk in the Americas. Ana Maria. Juan Carlos and Carolina, good morning. Good morning to everyone attending here. That's correct. Today we begin plenary session number 2. But before we begin this new session, we invite architect Ivan Caicedo to the scenario, subdirector of risk reduction in the National Unit for Risk Management, who will provide a summary on the first day for this sixth regional platform for the reduction of disaster risk in the Americas. Dr. Carlos Iván. Good morning, everyone. Before beginning to talk about the summary of our activities yesterday, the first day of this sixth platform on risk or disaster risk reduction, our national unit would like to highlight all of the contributions and organization done by the hosts and co-hosts of the sessions that we held yesterday in the plenary session and the 6 parallel sessions that allowed the feedback to the progress in the countries in the region around the 4 priorities of Sendai's framework. First, understanding disaster risk, strengthening governance and risk of disasters to manage this risk, the investment in reduction of risk and resilience, and the increase in preparation for cases of disaster to provide an efficient response and rebuilding in the environment of cooperation and reconstruction. In the first session or day of our platform, we developed, first of all, a plenary session associated to the first priority of the action plan, the regional action plan. Second, six parallel sessions for each of the 6 priorities of the regional plan, and a technical session where we had participants of the countries in the region associated to the identification of progress in the countries and the compliance of the regional action plan agreed in the 5th regional platform for disaster risk reduction that was held last year in Canada. In plenary session number 1, evaluation, analysis, and monitoring of risk tools and experiences, the conclusions of this panel included the identification of disaster risk management as a continuous process that involves community work and resilience as a process that in turn requires will and political commitment. From this, we identified the need for continuing and moving forward in the following actions to move forward in the compliance of this first priority. Have a differential approach that's also comprehensive, having understanding and comprehension of risk, continuing with the construction of capabilities to strengthen our institutions and communities, continuing with a continuous improvement of risk knowledge as a support to improve decision-making, and the recommendations associated to comprehensive, inclusive risk management in disasters, fostering the academy and the public sector cooperation to have assessments applied to specific cases, and including the retrospective of gender equality and disabilities within the plans and projects of disaster risk reduction, where all of the stakeholders are protagonists. We held 2 early alerts and the biological risk, also risk management. We recognize that we have progressed in terms of our threats, strengthening our analysis capabilities within the framework of our monitoring and follow-up systems, and our early alert system should be a comprehensive part of disaster risk management or civil protection with a multi-threat approach because of the different phenomena that happen within the region. What is very important is visible in a higher amount of teams and equipment, and we have seen that the information provided by technical scientific studies is a foundation for more informed decision-making within the region, and it has increased our need for in sharing information for decision-making by the public and private sector under the framework of the national risk management systems. Generation of knowledge and information in risk factors in the region is also associated with another action line within the priorities 2 and 3 within the regional action plan. Insofar as this qualifies disaster risk reduction decision-making, and we expect to support technical scientific monitoring activities for forecasts and alerts under the national standards to allow assigning human, technical, and financial resources for research that fosters sustainability in our development. In that sense, we have moved into the progress we expect in the design of monitoring and alert systems, acknowledging the co-responsibility between the public and private parties and fostering initiatives of and monitoring under how to move into the progress of the region, strengthening coordination mechanisms for the generation of information. This included recommending articulating the statistics work to move forward in a comprehensive way, measuring the evolution of risk and the vulnerability of the sectors and territories. This should allow the compliance of the new 2030 agenda, where the indicators, as in the case of the environmental sector, are more important in the reduction of disaster risk. We identified the need of investing in quality statistics to report the results obtained in the implementation under Sendai's framework and the SDOs. This allows to create a significant. We had parallel sessions that talked about different topics associated into compliance of the third element of compliance in Sendai and the different stakeholders' involvement, like integration in the private sector and practices and participation of the civil society in the implementation and monitoring under the Sendai's framework. There we talked about the significance of the interaction between the private sector and all of the forces acting in the territory and the civil society that intend to have the position of disaster risk reduction as a key factor for resilience in business and communities. We acknowledge the significance of acknowledging the different sectors, looking into different mechanisms and articulation with the public sector, creating more strength in reducing disaster risk. In the private sector, we propose to address this topic from a business continuity perspective, recognizing scenarios of risk that create a loss of productive activities that we are exposed to, eliminating the barrier of only thinking in responding to emergencies. From that perspective, we once again identify the benefit of the associations or alliances that are public-private in nature through a collective impact methodology that reaches visible results for all stakeholders. In that sense, we also identified the need of creating formal spaces for articulation between these national and international, beginning with the knowledge of risk factors in the territory and designing monitoring mechanisms of the activity and incidents in the territory to guarantee the continuity of their activity and forecast in the generation of adverse impact. In the case of civil society, we had successful cases of work in communities with NGOs, where the results of this interaction intends to have a more cohesive society, transferring capabilities through these institutions, and the identification, as in the private sector, of the significance in formalizing the mechanisms that are within social participation as elements that foster reduction of risk in terms of disasters. The main stakeholders in the civil society talked about more appropriation in the communities, more local administration, more capability of negotiation, side events, where we showed experiences around differential inclusion, protection of farm animals. In cases of disaster, there was a consultation in the first draft in support of Sendai's framework, and we discussed the base point for better risk management in Central America. Yesterday, there were 28 official declarations, implementation, and the proposals that will allow in the next few regional platforms to show the advance obtained in the execution of priorities and initiatives that have been stated in this plan. We ended the day with an official reception to reward the winners on the experience of community resilience as the best practices in the private sector, showing the commitment that the region has to foster communities that are less vulnerable and more resilient. Thank you very much. We will now welcome the second plenary session known Articulation of Global Agendas in Climate Change, Reduction of Risk, Disaster, and Objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals in the regional, sub-regional, national, and local scenarios, where we seek to identify from the national perspective how the different countries and international organizations can articulate the implementation of the commitments proposed in global agendas of climate change, SDGs, and disaster risk management. In this plenary session, we have as a moderator Mami Misutori, representative of the General Secretariat of the United Nations for the Reduction of Disaster Risk. And as panel members, America Santos Ribeiras, Vice Minister of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Environment in Cuba. Martín Santiago, Coordinator Resident of the United Nations in Colombia. Patricia Lombard-Cusack, Ambassador for the European Union before Colombia. José Luis Samaniego, Director of the Division of Sustainable Development and Human Settlements in CEPAL. We will also include in the next few minutes Janet Alegría, Vice Minister of Environment in Colombia. We now hand the floor to the moderator, Dr. Mami Misutori. Thank you very much. Good morning. Yesterday, we had a very productive day that ended with a tremendous carnival. A lot of happiness, a lot of joy, a lot of dance. And today, we have once again begun with the plenary session number 2. This session was organized by my office, the Office of the United Nations for Disaster Risk Reduction, together with the National Unit for Disaster Risk Management and the Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia. This session is about a very significant topic on how we will be coherent between the different agendas that the international community holds. 2015 was a year that was very important for us. March 1st, the member states adopted Sendai's framework. And then in September, Agenda 2030, the Agenda for Sustainable Development, the 17 goals, and then in November, the Paris Agreement to adapt and mitigate climate change. It was adopted. We should also remember the new urbanization agenda, the Ababa Action. This was a year where many very important agreements were adopted. Now, we have a difficult task on how to maintain or have all of these agendas be met together. It's easy to say it and hard to do it, but it's something we have to think about all together as member states of the UN. The United Nations system at the regional and country level. And that's why we have 5 at this exact point, 4 very well renowned members in this panel. They will give us their perspective on how we will build this coherence from now until 2030. Our 5 panel members. First, on our left, Dr. Americas Santos Riberos. Dr. Santos Riberos is the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Environment in Cuba. She is a professor of Havana University and founder member of the Cuban Society of Scientifical Technical Information. She's also a founder of the renewable energy source in Cuba, and she performed as a member of the advisory board of the Global Society or Organization on Intellectual Property. She was also director of the Cuban Office for Industrial Society. She has spoken in conferences on studies on risk, hazard, and climate change. Thank you very much, Dr. Santos Riberos, for being with us today. After her, we've got Mr. Dr. José Luis Samaniego. He's the director of the Division of Sustainable Development and Human Settlement in CEPAL. Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. The Regional Economic Commission that's very important for development, not only economic development, but social development for the region. Dr. Samaniego is an economist of Autonomous University with a master's degree in international. He's co-author of Climate of Trust, the book. This is a book that explores the climate change and its future in countries under development. And aside Dr. Samaniego, we have the Ambassador Patricia Lombard-Cusack, Ambassador for the European Union in Colombia. Ambassador Lombard-Cusack is an attorney. She was born in Valencia, Spain. She has a master's degree in international trade and European studies. Ambassador Lombard-Cusack has over 20 years' experience in the institutions of the European Union, always in the area of international affairs and foreign policies. She worked in the offices for Latin America and the Middle East, and she also worked in countries like Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay.
She was also part of the cabinet of European officials in charge of foreign relations, and recently, before being appointed as an ambassador here, she was the infrastructure director and security, infrastructure and security in the European Service of Foreign Action Office. And today, by my side, instead of Dr. Martín Santiago, we have Dr. Rafael Zamora Gómez del Campo, who is the FAO representative in Colombia since 2012. Mr. Zapana has over 15 years' experience in the sector. He performed as a specialist in rural development and territorial management in the ICA in Mexico, and he coordinated the special food security program performed by FAO in the same country, where he was in charge of the negotiations with local and state governments and federal governments, achieving the fulfillment of a special program for food securities in each state. Mr. Zavala is a zootechnician, and he has a master's in sustainable agriculture, as well as a PhD in rural development policies.
Estamos esperando la llegada de la doctora.
And we are waiting for Dr. Janice Patricia Alegría Copote, who has arrived at the Cartagena airport. Oh, she's here.
Hola.
I'm sorry. Hi.
Parece que el tráfico no estaba muy pesado, ¿verdad?
I think traffic was not as bad.
Bienvenida.
Welcome.
Bienvenida, doctora Janice.
Welcome, Dr. Janice Patricia Alegría Copote.
Permítame introducirle.
So let me introduce you. Dr. Alegría Copote is the Vice Minister of Environmental Land Use of the Cuban territory. Cuban Colombian territory. She is an industrial engineer. She was born in Cali, in the Agua Blanca district, with a specialization in environmental management. She has 20 plus years experience in environmental issues, environmental related issues, and she has performed as a subdirector of the Environmental Management Administrative Department in Cali. The General Directorate of Environmental Management, a part of the Vice Ministry, and she was the Subdirector of Education and Engagement. Panel members, distinguished panel members. And we will move on to the most important part of this session, the presentations. We have received some questions, and we have submitted the questions to the panel members, so I will read the question. And then we will ask our panel members to make their presentation. So the first panel member is Vice Minister, America Center, and the question for the Vice Minister is as follows. Cuba has performed a leadership role in the negotiations and the main development, global development frameworks worldwide, and in turn, as a country, Cuba has achieved with consistency between disaster prevention and adaptation to climate change, and 3, progress in terms of sustainable development. In this context, with the recent impact of Hurricane Irma, which caused damage in the northern coast of Cuba, the Council of Ministers prioritized the Tarea Vida plan, which is an ambitious plan aimed at protecting Cuba from the effects of climate change. We asked the Vice Minister, or our question for the Vice Minister is, can you please describe how this plan integrates the key SDGs in terms of development, climate change, and disaster risk disaster prevention? Vice Minister, you have the floor. Good morning. First and foremost, I would like to recognize all the collaborators that have made this event possible, in addition to thanking you for your invitation. First of all, there's a bit of context. In the Republic of Cuba, in terms of climate change, Tarea Vida is a plan that was created because Cuba has a strategy to prevent or to address disasters since the 90s. And we also have the regulatory standards for risk reduction, for disaster risk reduction. The government plan was approved in the Ministers' Council in Cuba, April 25, 2017, with a scope that goes beyond all the documents that have been drafted before. It updates all documents, and in addition, it includes the territorial dimension as a priority. Another element that must be highlighted is that this plan includes a progressive investment program, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and longer-term till 2100. This task is made up of 5 points. I won't refer all of them in detail. I will just name some of them, including no building of houses or constructions and areas that are vulnerable areas, and also minding vulnerable populations like women, the elderly, and children. Another point is preventive actions, because climate change is a technological challenge as well, because we must have certain tools in order to really protect our coasts, reduce the areas with crops near the coast, and also protect our areas from new temperatures, and also the organizations of settlement and structures based on our economic plan and international agreements. On the other hand, implementing legal standards in order to support the execution of this government plan. On the other hand, we have an action regarding the recovery and the maintenance of our mangroves and our coral reefs, and a maximum protection of against deforestation and the quality and amount of our soils. An important element is implementing and controlling the adaptation and mitigation measures around climate change in line with sectorial policies, including agriculture, construction, health, among other sectors in the country. Strengthening monitoring and surveillance, as well as prioritizing measures and actions to elevate the risk perception and increase the level of knowledge and awareness raising and population accessing international resources that have been established. This government plan comprises a comprehensive strategy that identifies vulnerable zones and areas. This is the first identification, whereby working with the affected areas, we determine how to enrich these strategies during its implementation, meaning it's not static, but vulnerable zones are incorporated as it goes on. There's an important point. Why was it important or possible to reach this plan? Our country has a strength, and it's the scientific potential it has. Since 1991, it has been carrying out research around climate change. In 2004, this became more, and this research was intensified based on the negative impact we have because of the Charles and Ivan hurricanes in the west of the country. So we began working around vulnerability and risk in all the municipalities. There are 169 municipalities in the country. And the most important part is the work that has been carried out along with communities, not facing climate change out of fear, because it could be terrible, but just focusing on how can we address it. So we have a micro project about danger in the coastal zone to 2050, 2100. This plan has not been produced by the ministry, but there is a program for the integration, including the academia, the government, and the civil society. On a yearly basis, we prepare a report around the vulnerability and danger scenarios, and we have been able to see that the sea level in Cuba has gone up 6.67 centimeters. So how can we control this plan? Every organization, every entity knows whatever pertains them based on the established action, so they have to have accountability before different organizations and explain how the measures are being implemented, how does it align with the economic plan, and how it develops. We are also increasing initiatives in order to access financing, not only by the World Fund for the Environment, but also with the Green Fund and other bilateral sources. This government plan involves all the sectors in the community, and we have worked in order to consistently integrate the implementation of the SDGs, our Tarea Vida plan, and our 2030 agenda, and the social and political agenda of the party, as well as common indicators that include the objectives of different global agenda for the development planning. This government plan includes prevention, the preparedness and effective response, and recovery. It enables us to get ready for disaster prevention and the integration with development measures, and it enables us to have a sustainable plan, making our country and our population resilient. Farewell. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, viceministra.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Thank you for your comprehensive presentation. Now, I will ask the Vice Minister, Adelia Copote, to make your presentation. I understand you have some slides.
Vamos a poner el PowerPoint ahora.
So this is your presentation. You may stand up. Come to the podium for your presentation. In the meantime, I will be reading the question that we have for her. So the question was, in March 2018, the Colombian government launched the COMPAS 3918 initiative, which is a roadmap clearly defined so as to achieve the SDGs, along with the key global agendas, including the Sendai framework, and it has assigned 30 national entities to cooperate in the advancement of this roadmap. So the question is, Vice Minister, can you please share with us what were the challenges in order to advance in the interinstitutional and political integration in order to implement this roadmap and ensure the consistency in the achievement of multiple agendas?